With tongues not too firmly pressed into cheeks, Channel Islanders are sometimes heard to say in wistful moments that, of course, England belongs to them. The idea is not outrageously fanciful, and to understand it we must go back to the centuries leading up to 1204. The islands had formed part of Gaul, and thus became part of the Roman Empire as a result of the efforts of Julius Caesar between 58 and 50 BC. Christianity of a Celtic variety arrived in the islands in the 5th or 6th century. They existed quietly as outposts under the bishopric of Coutances, when in the 9th and 10th centuries the Vikings did what they were really rather good at, with such success that in 911, by the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, the king of the Franks, Charles the Simple, recognised Rollo, the Viking leader, as Duke of Normandy, and granted to him the first of 3 large tracts of northwestern France. It seems that the last of those grants, made in 933, included the Channel Islands. Thus it was that in 1066 Duke William, these days called William the Conqueror, using the argument that the English crown had been offered to him by England's Edward the Confessor, expressed his displeasure by conquering the usurper Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. Thus, no doubt to their surprise, the islands found themselves to be part of the seedbed of one of the great empires of history, which had its zenith in the reign of Henry II, who ruled over Western Europe from the Scottish border to very nearly the Mediterranean. Alas, King John was somewhat careless with his inheritance, and we see him giving up his claim to his continental empire to King Philippe Auguste of France in 1204. Now we come to the clever bit. The Channel Islanders, wily then as now, persuaded King John to grant privileges which have lasted to this day. Thus it was that the islands retained their own laws and customs, which were based, for obvious reasons, on Norman law. Even to this day, the islands, although heavily anglicised, retain Norman law as the basis for their common law. Over the centuries, the privileges originally granted to the islands in the 13th century have been ratified in various royal charters. The seat of power reposed in the courts, but in the latter part of the 15th century, assemblies known as les États emerged, which were the precursors of today's States of Guernsey. Now, as then, the states are presided over by the senior judge. Until shortly after the Second World War, the courts held a considerable vestige of lawmaking power. In 1948, there came radical reform, manifested in the modern version of the states. So there we have it, an island which includes amongst its privileges autonomy, except in respect of its defence and external affairs, but which owes allegiance to England's monarch in right of her being a successor of the Duke of Normandy. The island stands as the remaining shards of land which at one time formed the western part of William the Conqueror's irresistible invader. The island has emerged as a liberal democracy, which is not a member of the European Union, which has its own parliament, court and government.